The King's Table. Step through the ornate corridors of time and imagine yourself stepping into the grandeur of a medieval castle. In this immersive narrative, we unravel the rich tapestry of the king's daily diet, a culinary journey that goes far beyond the simple image of endless feasts and opulent banquets. Although the modern image of medieval royalty often conjures up visions of endless platters of succulent meats and extravagant desserts, a closer look reveals that the daily meals of a medieval king were as much about ritual, symbolism, and political theatre as they were about nourishment. The King's Table, setting the scene. Picture the great hall of a medieval castle, soaring wooden beams, tapestries depicting heroic battles and legendary sagas, and long, polished oak tables laden with silver-gilt dishware and intricately carved serving utensils. Every detail, from the flickering torches casting dynamic shadows on the stone walls to the melodious trills of a lute in the background, was carefully orchestrated to instill awe and admiration. In this environment, food was not merely sustenance, it was a potent symbol of power, wealth, and social order. Kings like Henry III of England and Philip IV of France, for instance, used lavish displays of culinary art to reinforce their status and to communicate political alliances and social hierarchies. Royal banquets were designed as visual feasts, where the decor was as critical as the dishes themselves, underscoring that every morsel came with an implicit message of authority and divine favor. Beyond the myths, debunking common misconceptions. It is a persistent myth that medieval food was uniformly bland or monotonous, a diet of simple bread and meager gruel. Historical texts, however, tell a different story. In the codices of culinary records such as the Famille of Curie, a 14th-century collection of recipes from King Richard II's royal kitchen, and La Viandière, the celebrated cookbook of Guillaume Tyrrell, known as Taillevent, serving the French court, we find evidence of a vibrant and nuanced culinary tradition. These texts reveal the extensive use of spices, black pepper from India, saffron from Persia, ginger from the East, that were lavishly imported along the trade routes established during the Crusades. Such spices not only enhance flavor but also served as indicators of status and global connectivity. While peasant fare might have centered on simpler fare, even their meals varied with regional vegetables, wild herbs, and locally caught fish. This diverse array of ingredients, and the sophisticated methods of preparation like slow roasting, spicing, and elaborate sauce-making, demonstrates that medieval cuisine was a far cry from the watered-down stereotype often depicted in modern retrospectives. A day in the life, from dawn to dusk. The daily dining routine of medieval royalty was a carefully choreographed performance with its own rhythm and ritual. Instead of a single hearty meal, the King's Day was punctuated by multiple eating occasions, each with its own significance and set of ceremonies. In the early hours, a light repast might be served, consisting of pottage, a thick, starchy stew that could be enriched with bits of meat or vegetables, accompanied by bread and ale. As the day progressed, more substantial meals were hosted, a midday dinner that could include roasted game such as swan or boar, meticulously spiced and often presented with elaborate garnishes, followed by a later evening supper that offered a different set of delights, from savory pies to fruit compotes and delicate pastries. Every dish was prepared by a dedicated cadre of royal cooks and served by an equally skilled retinue of servants whose roles were codified by strict courtly conventions. Records from the court of King Edward I, for example, detail not only the sequence of these meals but also the precise rituals, prayers, toasts, and even the order in which dishes were served, that underscored the sacred and socio-political dimensions of each dining event. A culinary journey, exploring the menu. Delving into the menu that graced the King's Table opens up a world of unexpected delights. Signature dishes of the period often balance bold flavors with a flair for presentation. Imagine a dish of roasted venison, cooked slowly over an open hearth and then glazed with a reduction of spiced wine and honey, a favorite among the medieval nobility as recorded in banquet descriptions of King Louis IX's court. Equally surprising might be the presence of more exotic presentations, pies filled with a mixture of game, herbs, and fruit, elaborate sauces like verjuice, a sour juice made from unripe grapes, used to contrast the rich meat dishes, and even early forms of what might be considered hors d'oeuvres, small, intricately seasoned snacks enjoyed between the major courses. Beyond the individual dishes, the culinary practices of the time reflected a blend of regional traditions and foreign influences, from the Moorish spices that found their way into Spanish royal kitchens, to the North African techniques of slow cooking and marination adapted in the courts of southern Europe. These recipes, painstakingly recorded and passed down through generations, highlight a tradition of culinary innovation that was as much about artistic expression as it was about maintaining health and hygiene in an era before modern refrigeration. The legacy of the King's Table, a modern perspective. The influence of medieval culinary traditions extends far beyond the stone walls of ancient castles. Many techniques embraced by medieval cooks, such as slow roasting, the art of spicing, and the delicate balance of sweet and savory, continue to inform modern culinary practices. Contemporary chefs draw inspiration from medieval cookbooks, reinterpreting centuries-old recipes to create dishes that resonate with today's tastes while preserving a tangible link to the past. The elaborate banquets of medieval kings helped lay the groundwork for what would eventually evolve into the refined dining experiences of modern European cuisine. Today, there is a growing movement to revive ancient recipes, with culinary historians and gourmet chefs alike exploring the rich legacy of the King's Table. By embracing these historical techniques and ingredients, from clarified butter to exotic spice blends, it is possible to reconnect with an era when every meal was a celebration of life, art, and power. This exploration of the medieval king's diet reveals not only the culinary lavishness that defined royal life but also the intricate interplay between food, politics, and social order. In peeling back the layers of myth and modern misconception, we discover a world where the very act of dining was a display of cosmic order and earthly power, a legacy that continues to color modern dining trends and gastronomic innovation. As you reflect on this journey, consider how the echoes of medieval kitchens still resonate today, inviting us all to experience the timeless art of culinary creativity. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious. The medieval kitchen, what peasants ate and how they cooked. A day in the life, a medieval peasant's kitchen. Starting with a captivating opening shot of a recreated medieval kitchen, imagine the scene with smoke wafting from a fireplace, casting a warm and rustic glow over the simple yet functional space. Let's explore the daily food and cooking habits of medieval peasants. Understanding this aspect of history is crucial for gaining insights into the lives of ordinary people who formed the backbone of medieval society. The kitchen was often the heart of a peasant's home, where daily life revolved around food preparation and family gatherings. Despite the limited resources, peasants developed ingenious ways to make the most of what they had, demonstrating remarkable resilience and creativity. Let us delve deeper into the various ingredients and cooking techniques that defined the medieval peasant's diet, revealing a fascinating blend of resourcefulness and tradition. The humble ingredients, bread and beyond. In the medieval peasant diet, bread was the cornerstone of sustenance. The process of making bread from scratch began with grinding local grains, such as barley, oats, and rye, using a hand mill or a communal village mill. The flour was then mixed with water and sometimes a bit of salt to form a dough, which was left to rise naturally with wild yeast. The risen dough was shaped into loaves and baked in communal ovens or home hearths. Bread was not only a staple food but also a symbol of survival and community. Beyond bread, peasants relied on an array of humble ingredients to supplement their diet. Vegetables like cabbages, onions, and leeks were grown in small garden plots, while wild fruits such as berries and apples were foraged from nearby forests. Legumes, including beans and peas, were essential sources of protein, and when available, meats like pork, chicken, and fish added variety to their meals. The seasonality and availability of these ingredients dictated what was on the table, reflecting the intimate connection between peasants and their environment. Cooking methods, simplicity and efficiency. The primary cooking methods used by medieval peasants were characterized by simplicity and efficiency. Open fires served as the central cooking apparatus, around which families would gather for warmth and nourishment. Basic tools such as wooden spoons, knives, and iron cauldrons facilitated the preparation of meals. Roasting meat over an open flame was a common technique, requiring only a spit and patience to achieve a smoky flavor and tender texture. Boiling was another fundamental method, especially for preparing soups and stews that combined vegetables, legumes, and occasionally meat. These dishes were cooked in large earthenware pots that retained heat well and were durable enough to withstand daily use. Baking, though less frequent due to the need for an oven, allowed peasants to create bread and simple pastries. The use of earthenware pots and pans, prized for their affordability and practicality, exemplified the resourcefulness of peasant cooking. In addition to roasting and boiling, fermentation played a crucial role in peasant kitchens. Fermented foods like sauerkraut and sourdough not only preserved the harvest but also added essential nutrients to the diet. Techniques such as smoking and curing were also employed to extend the shelf life of meats, ensuring that families could sustain themselves during leaner times. Such practices showcased the medieval peasants' ability to adapt and thrive in their environment. Herbs and spices, though limited, were treasured for their ability to enhance the flavor of otherwise plain dishes. Commonly used herbs included parsley, sage, and thyme, all of which could be grown in small kitchen gardens. Peasants often relied on salt and vinegar for both seasoning and preservation, highlighting their ingenuity in maximizing available resources. Despite the simplicity of their cooking methods, peasant meals were rich in flavor and nutrition, reflecting a deep connection to the land and the seasons. The communal aspect of cooking and sharing meals reinforced social bonds and created a sense of unity among families and neighbors, underscoring the importance of food in medieval life. A meal fit for a peasant, a typical diet. Reconstructing a typical meal for a medieval peasant family reveals a modest yet nourishing array of dishes. A common supper might include a hearty vegetable stew, seasoned with herbs and thickened with barley or oats, served alongside freshly baked bread. On special occasions, a roasted piece of meat or fish might accompany the meal, offering a rare but cherished source of protein. Such meals were designed to be nutritious and fulfilling, essential for sustaining the physically demanding work of farming and labor that defined peasant life. Meals were not only a means of sustenance but also a vital aspect of social life. The communal nature of dining fostered a sense of togetherness and mutual support, as families and neighbors gathered to share food and stories. This communal bond was further reinforced by practices such as the sharing of bread, a ritual that symbolized unity and cooperation within the community. While the medieval peasants' diet and cooking methods might seem basic by today's standards, they were driven by a profound understanding of the land and its offerings. The resourcefulness and adaptability of peasants were evident in their ability to transform simple ingredients into varied and wholesome meals. The reliance on seasonal produce and local resources meant that peasant cuisine was inherently sustainable and environmentally harmonious. Beyond the daily sustenance, food played a pivotal role in the cultural and social fabric of medieval peasant life. Festivals and celebrations, often tied to agricultural cycles, saw the sharing of more abundant and diverse meals. During harvest festivals, communal feasts would feature an array of dishes, reflecting the bounty of the season and the collective effort of the community. This unification through food underscored the peasants' deep-rooted connection to the land and to one another. The culinary traditions of medieval peasants offer a window into their world, revealing a lifestyle marked by resilience, ingenuity, and communal strength. Their approach to food, though modest, was embedded with meaning and purpose, and it provided a foundation for their enduring survival despite the challenges of their time. Beyond the plate, food and society. Food in medieval society was a reflection of social hierarchy and status. While peasants subsisted on simple and locally sourced fare, the nobility indulged in elaborate feasts that showcased their wealth and power. These feasts featured exotic spices, imported wines, and intricate dishes prepared by skilled cooks. The stark contrast between the diets of peasants and nobles highlighted the broader disparities in medieval social structure. Understanding the role of food in medieval society offers valuable insights into the dynamics of social standing and cultural identity. Food was not merely a source of nourishment but a marker of one's place within the social hierarchy. From the humble bread of peasants to the opulent banquets of the aristocracy, the culinary practices of the medieval period reveal the intricate interplay between food, power, and community. Concluding the exploration of medieval food and cooking, viewers are encouraged to delve deeper into this fascinating aspect of history. By examining the daily lives and culinary traditions of medieval peasants, we gain a richer understanding of the resilience, resourcefulness, and communal bonds that shaped their world. This journey into the past invites us to appreciate the enduring legacy of medieval food culture and its relevance to our own lives today. Food was also a form of expression and communication, embodying the values, beliefs, and traditions of the community. Recipes and cooking techniques were passed down through generations, preserving the culinary heritage and ensuring the continuity of cultural practices. The act of preparing and sharing food was imbued with symbolic significance, reflecting the interconnectedness of the community and the cyclical nature of life. The medieval peasants' reliance on locally sourced ingredients fostered a deep understanding of the environment and its seasonal rhythms. This knowledge was crucial for survival, as it enabled peasants to maximize the yield of their crops and to store food for leaner times. Techniques such as drying, salting, and fermenting allowed for the preservation of food, providing a buffer against the uncertainties of weather and harvest. Furthermore, the communal aspect of food preparation and consumption strengthened the social fabric, creating a network of mutual support and cooperation. The sharing of meals was a daily reaffirmation of social ties, reinforcing the sense of belonging and collective identity. Food was not only sustenance but also a medium through which relationships were built and maintained, playing a central role in the cohesion and resilience of medieval peasant communities. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious. The Medieval Peasant's Daily Grind, a day in the life. Have you ever wondered how the vast majority of medieval society actually lived from sunrise to sunset? While the nobility feasted in castles, the life of a medieval peasant was defined by long days of labor, modest meals, and a deep connection to land and community. Let's journey through a day in the life of a medieval peasant, a narrative that not only reveals hardships but also celebrates resilience and ingenuity. For peasants, life in the Middle Ages was a continuous battle against nature and circumstance. Bound by the feudal system, many worked as serfs attached to manorial estates such as those recorded in England's Domesday Book, 1086, and rural accounts from northern France. They lived simply, relying on family, community, and the demands of the land to survive. This exploration illuminates their daily routine while highlighting how the structure of medieval society, from the manorial system to communal labor practices, shaped their existence. Morning duties. At the break of dawn, when the first light crept over tiled rooftops and thatched cottages, the day began with nature's own alarm, the crow of a rooster. With no mechanical clocks to mark their hours, peasants rose with nature. Their first responsibilities were practical and unyielding, tending to livestock that were the backbone of their sustenance. Whether in a small village in Normandy or an English manor, the morning ritual included feeding chickens, pigs, and cows, and then milking the cows, a vital task that provided fresh milk used to produce butter and cheese. Historians like Francis Geese have noted that these early hours were crucial for ensuring that every animal was healthy enough to support a household through uncertain times. Preparing breakfast. After caring for the animals, the peasant's humble kitchen bustled with activity. Simple breakfast fare, typically a porridge made from oats or barley, was prepared over a modest hearth. Coarse, locally ground bread, sometimes served with a small slice of cheese or a bit of salted meat, was common. Archaeological findings across medieval settlements in Britain and continental Europe support the notion that cereals like barley formed the dietary staple for many peasant families. Although the meal was modest, it provided the essential energy to begin a day of back-breaking labor in the fields. Field work. Once breakfast was finished, the fields called. Agriculture was the lifeblood of medieval society, and nearly every peasant's day was spent under the open sky, transforming raw land into rows of grain and vegetables. Whether plowing heavy, often wooden plows drawn by oxen, or sowing essential seeds, the tasks varied by season, each tool recorded in the manorial rolls and local court documents that reveal the feudal obligations of the peasantry. In spring, families tilled and sown; in summer, they managed weeding and nurturing; and come autumn, the brisk pace of harvest took over. The rhythms of daily rural life were not only physical routines but also cultural markers that defined medieval society. Tools and techniques. Peasants rarely enjoyed access to sophisticated technology. Their tools, plows, hoes, scythes, and sickles, were handmade artifacts passed down through generations. These tools, often meticulously maintained, highlight how traditional craftsmanship and local innovations, like the heavy plow or the three-field crop rotation system, introduced in parts of northern Europe, increased agricultural productivity over time. Despite the simplicity of these implements, peasants continually refine techniques to maximize yields and secure enough food to sustain their families. Such agricultural ingenuity is echoed in medieval accounts and is a testament to the resourcefulness of those who worked the land. Collaborative efforts. In a world where no one person could shoulder the burden of survival alone, community was everything. Field work was frequently a communal affair. Villagers would join forces during crucial periods like planting or harvest. This cooperative spirit was bolstered by the practice of working parties, where families and neighbors would share tools, labor, and knowledge. Recorded in numerous local charters and ordinances, these collective efforts reinforce not only economic productivity but also a rich social fabric that helped bind communities during times of adversity. The midday meal. Around noon, after several relentless hours in the field, a respite came in the form of a midday meal. More substantial than the early breakfast, this repast was designed to replenish a peasant's dwindling energy reserves. It often consisted of hearty bread, seasonal vegetables, and on rare occasions, small portions of smoked or salted meat or fish. Alongside these solid staples, ale, considered safer than water, was a typical drink. Such meals provided the necessary sustenance to face the remainder of the day and are frequently noted in historical records detailing the daily provisions on manors across Europe. Afternoon duties. Once the midday meal had been digested, the pace did not slacken. The afternoon was a mix of returning to the fields and completing essential household chores. Repairs of tools, mending clothing, tending to small kitchen gardens, or even patching humble roofs were all part of the daily grind. Every act of repair or cultivation was a critical investment in the peasant family's survival, a fact that resonates through medieval household inventories and estate records. These tasks, though less glamorous than field work, were indispensable elements of maintaining a sustainable life. Seasonal variations. The duties of a medieval peasant were inextricably linked to the cycle of the seasons. In spring, the focus lay on preparing the soil and sowing cereal grains like wheat, barley, and rye, crops frequently mentioned in medieval agricultural treatises. The summer months demanded constant vigilance over growing crops and livestock, while autumn was a frantic period of harvesting that packed long hours into a brief season. Even winter, though a respite from the rigors of outdoor labor, was a time of its own challenges. Keeping livestock fed and preparing food reserves for the months ahead was paramount. Medieval documents, such as local manorial accounts, meticulously recorded these seasonal cycles and the communal tasks they inspired. Evening routine. As dusk settled over the countryside, the weary peasant trudged home. The evening meal, much like the midday repast, was designed to provide warmth and a final burst of energy after a day in the fields. Shared in the cramped quarters of modest dwellings, often single-room cottages beneath thatched roofs, the meal was a time for family and neighbors to gather, exchange stories, and simply find solace in communal togetherness. The soft glow of a hearth in these somber settings evoked a temporary reprieve from the day's ordeal. Social and religious activities. Beyond the labor, medieval life was deeply steeped in social and religious practices. As darkness fell, the village would often converge in a simple chapel or gather outdoors for evening prayers. Church services and communal worship were integral to daily life, underscoring a shared belief in a higher purpose and offering hope amid difficulties. In many regions, from the parishes of England to the rural monasteries of France, religious observances also served as important social occasions, reinforcing community bonds and offering collective relief through shared faith. Rest and reflection. After a long day of toil and community interactions, rest was a cherished necessity. Peasant homes were humble, typically a single room with a thatched roof and minimal furnishings, but they were sanctuaries where families found both physical refuge and emotional respite. In these quiet spaces, the long hours of labor gave way to moments of reflection, storytelling, and the quiet satisfaction of daily survival. It was here that the communal spirit and resilience of medieval peasants shone, echoing through the centuries as a foundational element of European rural life. Thus, the life of a medieval peasant was defined by arduous work, adversity, and a resilient community spirit. From the early hours of dawn to the quiet sighs of night, every moment was a testament to human endurance and the drive for survival. While their struggles were great, peasants continually innovated and leaned on the power of shared labor and faith. Their existence is not merely a tale of hardship but a powerful reminder of the human ability to adapt and thrive despite overwhelming odds. Understanding their daily grind equips us with a deeper appreciation of the social and economic structures that laid the groundwork for modern society. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious. A Night in Medieval Times, Reflections and Lessons. In an age before electric lights, digital distractions, or alarm clocks, nighttime in medieval Europe was a world unto itself. The rhythms of daily life were dictated not by personal convenience or technology, but by nature, tradition, and faith. Once the sun vanished below the horizon, darkness ruled. A single flickering candle might mark the boundary between safety and fear, just as the tolling of a church bell could signal the beginning of a sacred silence. The vast majority of people ceased their labors at dusk, shops closed, hearth fires were banked, and households retreated behind bolted doors. To modern sensibilities, many medieval sleep patterns can seem strange or disorienting, but within them lie rich insights into how people once experienced time, rest, and community. By studying the habits and assumptions surrounding medieval rest, we uncover a world shaped by vulnerability, ritual, and resilience. In the differences between then and now, we discover enduring lessons about the essence of the night. A different world, time, fear, and faith in the medieval night. The twilight of certainty. For the medieval mind, nightfall was not merely the absence of sunlight, it was a liminal realm, a time of uncertainty and transition. Unlike the modern city, brightened by streetlights and secured by 24-hour policing, medieval nights were characterized by darkness, mystery, and a suspension of most ordinary activity. As the sun set, much of the known world literally receded into shadow. By evening, towns and villages grew quiet, shops and market stalls shuttered at dusk, and city gates were locked fast until dawn. In many places a curfew bell rang out to signal that it was time for everyone to bank their fires and stay indoors. Medieval chroniclers describe how at night the city gates are locked tight. The city is like one big household, with everything well secured. In communities from Paris to York, such curfews created an expectation of collective rest and safety after dark. Travelers caught outside would find the gates barred for the night. Within the walls, streets emptied except for watchmen on patrol. The world shrank to one's immediate household or the circle of a campfire. Beyond that circle lay darkness and the unknown. Medieval people did not measure time at night in precise minutes or hourly intervals as we do now. There were no glowing clocks on the wall or pocket watches to consult. Instead, time was experienced through natural and ecclesiastical markers, the fading of twilight, the position of the stars or moon, the crowing of a rooster toward dawn, or the toll of a distant church bell. The structure of the medieval day and night was heavily influenced by the church's canonical hours. Monastic communities divided day and night into a cycle of prayer, matins, or vigils, deep in the night, lauds at daybreak, prime in early morning, then terce, sext, none through midday and afternoon, vespers at sunset, and compline at the day's end. These religious intervals did more than organize monastic routine, they subtly shaped communal consciousness even for laypeople. The parish church's bells might ring out for vespers or compline, audible cues that the day was ending. At night, while most lay folk slept, the monks in local monasteries kept the hours alive by rising to chant matins in the pre-dawn darkness. In this way, time after sunset was sanctified and punctuated by prayer rather than by commerce or work. A town's night watch and the monastery's bell towers were the twin guardians of order against the chaos that darkness threatened to unleash. Nighttime was kept vigiled by these sentinels, the watchmen who made rounds with lantern and staff, and the clergy who prayed through the wee hours. It's important to note that the medieval sense of time was elastic and communal. Without widespread mechanical clocks, which only became common in the late Middle Ages, people relied on shared experiences and cues. The very word curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. A bell would announce this each evening, telling everyone it was time to smother hearth fires for safety. The end of daylight was a community event marked by sound and ritual. Likewise, dawn was signaled by church bells or the natural chorus of roosters. This experimental way of telling time fostered a more intuitive rhythm of life. Sleep and waking were guided by environmental cues and custom rather than minute-by-minute calculation. In practical terms, most people went to bed not at a fixed time, but whenever darkness and the day's labor dictated. If the moon was bright or a festival was underway, bedtime might be later. In long winter nights, it came earlier. The result was a flexible, almost seasonal approach to rest that modern clock-driven schedules rarely allow. The role of fear. To close one's eyes in the medieval night was, in a sense, to place oneself in the hands of fate, or for the devout, in the hands of God. The physical dangers of night were very real. Without street lighting or effective law enforcement, darkness provided cover for all manner of hazards. A stray spark from an untended hearth could reduce a whole district of timber houses to ashes while everyone slept. Raiders or bandits sometimes struck under the veil of night, when lookouts were few. Wild animals, though wary of humans, posed threats on the edges of settlements, wolves prowling for livestock, or rabid dogs wandering in from the woods. Crime flourished after sunset as well. Thieves and violent criminals found it easier to operate unseen. It was understood for centuries that after dark the unlit streets belonged to the disorderly and immoral elements bent on thievery or worse. Entire communities feared the figure of the nocturnal nightwalker, so much that medieval towns appointed night watchmen and enacted nightwalker statutes allowing the arrest of anyone lurking outside after curfew. Simply put, honest folk had ample reason to be anxious once the lamps were doused. Beyond these tangible threats, the medieval night was also steeped in supernatural fear. In a world where illness or death could strike without warning, it is little surprise that people filled the darkness with ghosts, demons, and other spirits that might prey on the unwary sleeper. Bedtime prayers and charms were not only signs of piety, they were spiritual safeguards against the unknown dangers of the dark. A classic Christian bedtime prayer intones, "Now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." Those lines echo a very real medieval anxiety, that one might not wake at all. Death during sleep, whether from illness, smoke inhalation, or other causes, was a known occurrence. The Church encouraged the faithful to end each day with an examination of conscience and an act of contrition, effectively preparing one's soul for eternity in case the night should be their last. It was common to keep a cross or holy relic near the bed for protection. Parents taught their children rhyming prayers to guardian angels to watch over them through the night. The act of lying down to sleep carried a faint echo of death. Indeed, as some noted, the sleeping body resembles a corpse in repose. This connection drove certain nobles to an odd practice. They would sleep propped up or semi-recumbent, since lying completely flat was thought of as the position of the dead and might invite misfortune. Nocturnal folklore vividly illustrated the era's fears. Medieval sermons and tales often reinforced belief in malevolent beings that became active after dark, when the veil between the living and the dead thinned. Some examples of these night terrors included the Wild Hunt. A spectral procession of ghostly riders and hounds was said to rampage across the night sky or through the woods. Accounts from England, France, and Germany describe a cacophony of pounding hooves and baying dogs led by a cursed or demonic huntsman. Witnessing the wild hunt was considered a dire omen, a sign of looming war, plague, or personal doom. In one 12th century chronicle, black hellhounds and headless horsemen were seen galloping for nights on end, interpreted as souls of the damned roaming without rest. Such stories, often recorded by clergymen, served as warnings of the spiritual dangers lurking in sin and disorder. Incubi and succubi. These were demonic creatures that preyed on people as they slept. In Christian folklore, an incubus was a male demon who would creep into bed with women, and a succubus was a female demon seducing men. Victims would report terrifying nightmares, paralysis, or unexplained physical signs in the morning. Medieval people offered these demons as explanations for phenomena like sleep paralysis, erotic dreams, or even unexpected pregnancies. The very word nightmare has roots in this era. The Old English mare was an evil spirit believed to sit on a sleeper's chest. To ward them off, one might sprinkle holy water around the bed, recite scripture, or wear a sackcloth to bed as a sign of humility. Incubi and succubi embodied both the sexual anxieties and the vulnerability of people during sleep. Restless dead and nocturnal apparitions. Folklore and local legends spoke of ghosts and revenants, reanimated corpses, that wandered at night. Unlike saint souls which were at peace, these were souls burdened by sins or stuck in purgatory, unable to rest. Medieval chronicles tell of processions of the dead moving through villages at midnight, or hunted spirits wailing in the wind. Churchmen sometimes described these phantoms as souls in torment, undergoing a sort of itinerant purgatory on earth until purged of their penance. Such tales were often used in sermons. If you died with unresolved sins, your spirit might be doomed to walk the night until the debt was paid. People thus prayed for the departed at night and lit blessed candles to guide lost souls or repel malevolent ones. These supernatural beliefs were not merely fringe superstitions, they were woven into the spiritual fabric of the medieval night. A person's fear of what lurked in the dark went hand in hand with faith in God's protection. Before bed, families would say their prayers, draw crosses over the door, and invoke saints or angels for safekeeping until morning. A common evening prayer from the Compline service entreated God to defend us from all perils and dangers of this night, a line that captured the mood of an entire era. In practice, fear did not usually prevent medieval people from sleeping, but it enveloped their sleep in a framework of spiritual vigilance. They understood the night as a time of heightened vulnerability, both physical and spiritual, and so they approached it with corresponding caution. Sleep was a kind of surrender of one's consciousness and control, so ideally one went to bed in a state of grace, with protections in place for body and soul. In this way, even as their bodies lay still, their faith kept watch. The hidden lives of medieval servants. The forgotten workers of the medieval world. Imagine dawn breaking over a medieval English castle, the grey light creeping into chilly stone halls as a handful of bleary-eyed figures stoke kitchen fires and scatter fresh rushes on the floor. These figures are the household servants, the invisible yet essential workforce that kept noble estates running daily. From pre-dawn until long after dusk, servants toiled behind the scenes, tending to every domestic need of lords and ladies. Chronicles and romances of the Middle Ages celebrated knights and nobles, but rarely mention the maids who scrubbed flagstones or the grooms who fed war horses. Historical documentation about servants is indeed sparse. They left few records of their own, and often appear only as nameless entries in account books or brief notes in letters. Yet, by piecing together household records, court rolls, personal letters, and even literature, modern historians can reconstruct their lives and recognize their significance. For example, the 15th-century letters of the Peasants family preserve snippets of servants' voices. Margaret Peasants dutifully recorded the transient words of her household and estate servants in correspondence to her husband. Such fragments remind us that servants, though largely forgotten by history, were very much present and vital in their own time. Medieval servants truly were the forgotten workers of the medieval world. They served in the shadows of great halls and manor kitchens, seldom noted by name, yet their work made possible the splendid lifestyle of the nobility. Reconstructing their daily existence is an exercise in detective work, combing through royal household ordinances, aristocratic account books, and scattered remarks in chronicles for clues. It is a necessary task, for without these invisible servants, the castles of medieval England could not function. In this overview, we will shine a light on the hidden lives of these men and women, their roles and responsibilities, their daily routines, their place in the social hierarchy, and the challenges and occasional opportunities they faced. In doing so, we give overdue recognition to the servants' indispensable contributions in sustaining noble life, even as we acknowledge the scant evidence that survives of their personal stories. The roles and responsibilities of servants. Medieval noble households were complex operations, and servants filled a wide spectrum of specialized roles. Broadly, their duties fell into three categories: household servants, kitchen staff, and estate workers. Each group required different skills, and each servant, from the highest steward to the lowliest scullion, had a defined place in the lord's domestic machinery. Household servants. These were the attendants responsible for the lord's residence and personal needs. At the top stood officers like the steward, or seneschal, and chamberlain, often of gentle birth and entrusted with great responsibility. The steward acted as the estate manager and chief administrator, overseeing finances, legal affairs, and the coordination of all other staff. A medieval guide to stewardship, seneschalcy, advised that the seneschal of lands ought to be prudent and faithful, and he ought to know the law of the realm, to protect his lord's business and to instruct the bailiffs who are beneath him. The chamberlain, meanwhile, managed the lord's private chambers and wardrobe. He looked after the lord's clothing and even kept track of livery uniforms issued to other servants. For the lady of the household, there might be a lady's maid or gentle-born companion performing equivalent duties, dressing the lady, tending to her chamber, and managing her jewels and linens. Lower-ranking household servants included the laundress, who washed clothing and linens in large tubs of heated water mixed with lye soap, and the chambermaids who swept and tidied rooms, laid fresh rushes on floors, made up beds, emptied chamber pots, and kept the fires lit in the chambers. Young boys of good family might serve as pages. At around 7 years old, a page would be sent to a lord's household to run errands, carry messages, and wait upon the lord at meals. Pages were not paid wages. Instead, their payment was the training in manners and management they received as they observed and assisted the lord, a first step on the path to knighthood for those of noble blood. It's important to note that despite later romantic images of castles teeming with maidservants, most household servants in medieval England were male. Surviving household ordinances show far more men employed than women. Women usually served in gender-specific roles like laundry or as ladies' attendants, and sometimes the wives of male servants worked unofficially alongside their husbands. Kitchen staff. The castle's kitchens were a world unto themselves, staffed by a brigade of servants to prepare the vast quantities of food required by a noble household. At the head of the kitchen was the cook or master chef, responsible for planning menus and overseeing meal preparation. In a great lord's household, the cook supervised a team of undercooks and specialists. There were servants dedicated to butchering meats, baking bread, brewing ale, and making confections. Larger establishments even had niche experts, a sauce-maker, a pastry chef, a waferer to bake light wafers for desserts, and so on. Supporting them were countless helpers. Scullions scrubbed pots and pans, spit boys, often small boys, sat by the hearth roasting meat on the spit, and general kitchen boys fetched water and fuel. Two particularly important offices were the butler, who managed the wine and beer in the buttery, and the pantler, who oversaw the pantry with its stores of bread. These officers ensured that drink and bread, staples of every meal, never ran out. Contemporary account books give us an idea of the scale of these operations. For instance, the Royal Constitutio Domus Regis, Household Ordinance, of 1136 lists dozens of kitchen servants, from master cooks down to bakers, along with their daily allowances of food and drink. Preparing daily meals for a castle meant coordinating bakers to churn out bread, brewers to make ale, and poultry keepers to supply chickens and eggs. It was the cook's duty to manage all this activity. One medieval cookbook, the Grandeur of Tailvant, contains elaborate recipes used by such cooks, including rich meat pies and spice stews, hinting at the expertise these kitchen staff needed to satisfy their lord's palate. In sum, the kitchen servants formed the engine room of the household, turning raw farm produce into hearty meals for dozens or even hundreds of people each day. Estate workers. Beyond the mansion or castle walls, a noble's estate required its own cadre of servants and workers. These individuals might not serve inside the lord's home, but they were part of the extended household in a broad sense, keeping the lord's lands productive. The chief among estate staff was often the bailiff or estate steward, who managed the manor farms, collected rents from tenant farmers, and oversaw agricultural work. Under him toiled ploughmen, oxherds, cowherds, swineherds, and shepherds, who tended the flocks of sheep that could be a major source of manorial income, providing wool, the medieval gold. A later medieval estate management manual by Walter of Henley advised landowners on selecting honest and competent bailiffs and keeping close watch on daily outputs of the domain farm, implying that estate servants had to be both hard-working and trustworthy under distant supervision. On the estate's lands, gardeners and orchard keepers cultivated vegetables, herbs, and fruit for the household's tables. For a large castle, there might be a park keeper or gamekeeper maintaining deer parks for hunting. And of course, there were the stable hands and grooms who cared for the lord's horses. Horses were essential for medieval life, for war, travel, hunting, and transport, so grooms occupied an important niche. They mucked out stalls, brushed and fed the horses, and prepared them for riding or for pulling carts. The castle's marshal oversaw all horse-related operations, and often supervised military readiness as well, with grooms and blacksmiths under him to shoe horses and repair wagons. We even hear of specialized roles like the falconer, trained in handling the lord's hunting hawks, and watchmen or porters who guarded the castle gates. In aristocratic households like that of the Berkeley family or the peasants, surviving account books note payments to such workers, entries for wages of ploughmen, purchases of fodder by the head groom, or liveries, uniforms, issued to gardeners give us a paper trail of these servants' existence. While these estate workers toiled outdoors rather than in the great hall, they were as critical to the lord's comfort as any indoor servant. Their work meant that the household was fed, the grounds kept orderly, and the lord's wealth, tied up in crops and livestock, was maintained. It's clear that nearly every facet of life in a noble household corresponded to a servant's job. From personal attendants who dressed the lord in the morning, to kitchen hands who cooked his supper, to ploughmen who harvested the grain for his bread, a chain of labor supported the lofty lifestyle of the medieval nobility. As one historian aptly put it, a great household was like a microcosm of society, containing its own administrators, artisans, and workers within it. Each servant, high or humble, knew their duties and their place in this hierarchy. In the next installment, we will step into the shoes of a typical servant and follow a day in their life, to see how all these roles came together in practice. A day in the life of a medieval servant. What was it like to be one of these servants, going about your work from sunrise to sunset? To answer that, let us imagine a typical day in an English manor house or castle, seen through the eyes of a servant. In reality, the experiences of a steward versus a scullion would differ greatly, but by combining various accounts we can sketch a general picture of daily routines. Morning, long before the lord and lady stir from their beds, the household servants are up and busy. A castle maid servant is often the first to awaken in the cold pre-dawn. Her day might begin by creeping into the great hall or solar with a lantern to revive the hearth. She sweeps the floors clean of yesterday's rushes, the straw or herbs strewn to keep floors fresh, and, if needed, lays down a new layer of rushes across the flagstones. Next she makes the rounds of the bedchambers, drawing curtains, emptying chamber pots, and carrying out the ashes from the braziers or fireplaces. If the household has a dedicated laundress, soiled bed linens and clothing are bundled off to be washed, otherwise the maid might have to cart heavy buckets of water from the castle well for washing laundry herself. Fetching water was a laborious but daily task. A laundress would haul water and heat it in great cauldrons, scrubbing clothes with strong lye soap that chapped her hands. Meanwhile, in the kitchen before sunrise, the cook's assistants are already at work. They've relit the kitchen fires and set large pots of pottage, a thick porridge stew, to simmer for the servant's own simple breakfast. A scullion boy might be sent to the well or nearby stream to bring in fresh water for cooking and brewing. The baker is kneading dough for the day's bread, and if it's a baking day he will fire the bread ovens at dawn. As the first light filters in, the Lord's personal attendants prepare for his awakening. A chamberlain or valet readies a ewer of warm water and towels for washing, lays out the Lord's clothing for the day, and prepares to help him dress. Midday, by late morning, the household is in full swing. The Lord and Lady have perhaps broken their fast on bread, cheese, or ale brought to their chambers by servants, and now everyone braces for the main meal of the day, usually served around midday. In the kitchen, activity reaches a peak. Meat is roasting on the spit, with a dedicated spitboy turning it slowly over the flames. Cooks chop vegetables and mix sauces, following the recipes or their lord's tastes. An aroma of baking bread, stew, and spices fills the air. In a well-organized household, each servant knows his part. Butlers bring up casks of ale and wine from the cool storerooms, pantlers fetch loaves from the pantry, and servers set the trestle tables in the great hall. They cover the tables with clean linen cloths and arrange knives, spoons, trenchers, edible bread plates or wooden boards, and cups. When the food is finally ready, a procession forms to bring it into the hall. This is a moment of pride for the staff, showcasing their work. The marshal of the hall might announce the meal, and servants carry in dishes of meats, pies, and fish in order. During the Lord's dinner, the higher-ranking servants perform very visible duties. The carver expertly slices meats at the table, the cupbearer pours wine and presents the cup to the Lord on bended knee, and pages bustle around offering dishes or refilling trenchers. In a famous illustration from the early 14th century Luttrell Psalter, we see a great lord dining while attended by servants. A bearded servant presents platters of food, and a kneeling cupbearer hands a drink to the lord. Surrounding them, on the table, lie knives, loaves of bread, bowls of stew, and other dishes, indicating the servants' meticulous preparations. This vibrant scene underscores how servants orchestrated every aspect of a noble meal, from cooking to courteous presentation. Regular household servants ate after the lord. Once the gentry had been served and were busy feasting, the lower servants would take their own meal, often in the kitchen or a side hall. Their fare was simple: coarse bread, pottage or boiled meat from the lord's table, and ale to drink, a far cry from the delicacies their masters enjoyed. One 15th century source notes that everyone except the lord's family and highest guests sat and slept in the great hall, which doubled as the dining room. Thus, after serving the lord, the servants might sit at the lower tables of the same hall to eat their noonday dinner, chattering among themselves but ever attentive in case the lord or lady should call for something. Evening, after the main meal, servants cleared the tables. Scraps from the Lord's dinner might be collected, some to be given as alms for the poor at the gate, others set aside for the servants' supper later. The afternoon was a time for continuing chores. A housemaid might spend early afternoon laundering clothes or ironing the Lord's garments. If an important day is coming, his doublet and hose must be immaculate, or mending torn fabrics by firelight. The laundresses, having soaked and scrubbed linens all morning, haul the heavy wet load to hang in a breezy courtyard or on hedges to dry. On the estate, outdoor workers use the remaining daylight for farming tasks. A ploughman urges oxen to finish a field, gardeners tend the Lord's rose beds or herb garden behind the manor. As dusk approaches, the household prepares for the night. Supper in a medieval household was generally a lighter meal eaten later in the evening, and again servants worked to cook and serve it, though on a lesser scale than the midday feast. After supper, the lord might relax in his solar with wine or engage in conversation, music, or prayers. A few attendants stay on hand to fetch anything required. A chamberlain helps the lord undress and readies his bed, while a lady's maid does the same for the lady, combing her hair and laying out nightclothes. Other servants finish tidying up, cleaning the kitchen utensils, banking the cooking fires safely for the night, and shutting up the storerooms. Before bedtime, the watchmen or porters make their rounds, ensuring doors and gates are barred. Finally comes what little rest the servants get. Most of them slept communally, often right where they worked. A description of castle life notes that most servants and even lower-ranking knights slept in the great hall itself, on pallets or benches around the dying fire. In many households, the male servants bedded down in the hall or in cellar and attic chambers set aside for servants, while female servants might share a small dormitory or sleep near their mistress's room. Privacy was scarce. They were fortunate to have a straw-filled mattress. Many just slept on rushes or a simple blanket. After an exhausting day of hauling water, scrubbing floors, and running up and down staircases, a servant likely collapsed into sleep quickly despite the hard bedding. In a few hours, it would start all over again at the next crack of dawn. It was a life of ceaseless labor and little leisure. Perhaps there were moments of respite, a stolen chat among scullions, a brief pause to enjoy the warmth of the kitchen fire, a holy day festival when work lightened a bit, but for the most part, a servant's day was consumed by service. And yet, there was a rhythm and dignity to it as well. They took pride in their skills, whether it be a cook perfecting a sauce or a maid keeping a noble lady's chambers spotless. The routines of each day, repetitive but essential, made them the unsung backbone of the medieval household. Social hierarchy and servant life. Within a noble household, servants occupied a strict hierarchy of their own, mirroring the feudal hierarchy of the wider world. Not all servants were equal. There was a world of difference between the elegant steward who sat near the high table and the dirty scullion who slept on the kitchen floor. Servants' ranks and duties were sharply defined, and upward mobility, while difficult, was not impossible. At the top were the household officers, those with managerial roles or specialized expertise, often accorded respect and some privileges. The steward or seneschal, as noted, could be a man of considerable standing, sometimes a knight or lesser noble himself, who interacted almost as an equal with the lord. He might dine with the family on occasion or have a private room. The chamberlain, marshal, and head cook also ranked high. They exercised authority over other servants. These upper servants could be rewarded with good salaries, gifts, or even land for loyal service. Many great lords sought educated men for such positions. In fact, by the 13th century there were even training programs for stewards. One source notes an Oxford college that offered 6 to 12-month courses for prospective stewards in accounting, estate law, and letter writing, a medieval business school of sorts to produce competent estate managers. Below them were the yeomanry and gentry servants, people of slightly lower status who nevertheless had important roles. For example, a large household might classify certain trusted servants as yeomen, indicating a middling rank. The yeoman of the pantry or yeoman usher would be above the ordinary servants but below the knights and gentlemen of the household. In some cases, members of the lord's extended family or lower nobility served in honorary domestic roles. For instance, a young noble might serve as the lord's cupbearer or esquire of the body, personal attendant, as a form of apprenticeship in knighthood. These well-born youths were technically servants but carried social prestige due to their birth. A king or great magnate often expected to be attended by the sons of other nobles, lords expected to be served by well-born men and boys, and kings by the offspring of great lords. Service in such cases was as much about patronage and networking as labor, a young squire serving wine at the royal table was learning courtly manners and making connections that could benefit his future career. Lower down the ladder were the ordinary servants, the majority, who did the hard manual work. These included the kitchen maids, scullions, grooms, laundresses, and workers. They addressed the upper servants with deference, using master or mistress as appropriate. Household rulebooks and books of etiquette from the era make clear that every servant was expected to know their place. The Book of Nurture, by John Russell, a 15th-century treatise on good manners for servants, provides insight into this structured environment. John Russell himself had been an usher and marshal in the household of the Duke of Gloucester, and his manual instructs young servants on everything from carving meat properly to how to address superiors with humility. Servants were trained to bow at the correct times, to never turn their back on a lord, and to behave with courtesy and discretion at all times. The very word servant in this context was honorable, it implied loyalty and duty. A well-run household was often remarked upon in terms of its servants' discipline and propriety. One 15th-century poem, the Book of Courtesy, imagines an ideal noble house where every servant, from steward to child page, is orderly, the attendants are tidy, silent and less spoken to, quick to obey, and skilled in their work. Despite the idealized portraits, real life could be messier. In smaller households, servants often had to multitask and overlap duties. A royal ordinance might strictly define the job of a panther versus a butler, but on a modest estate one man might effectively do both jobs. Historian Kate Mettes notes that many servants were jacks of all trades. A groom might also help in the kitchens on busy feast days, or a lady's maid might also nurse the household sick if no physician was available. The hierarchy was thus somewhat fluid at the bottom, though rigid at the top. A scullion could not presume to sit at table with a yeoman, but he might find himself handling tasks beyond scouring pots if necessity demanded. The social world of servants extended beyond work duties. High-ranking servants sometimes formed connections with their masters that blurred social lines. A trusted steward or old nurse might become a confidant to the family. The literature of the period has examples of wise old servants offering counsel. Think of Chaucer's tales or Shakespeare's later medieval set plays, where loyal servants advise rash princes. And in some cases, household service was a pathway, though narrow, to advancement. A page of noble blood was expected to become a knight, but even a common-born servant might rise to become a valet or clerk if he proved exceptionally capable and lucky. We even find instances of nobles rewarding faithful servants by arranging good marriages for them or appointing them to lucrative offices. Within a great lord's affinity, his circle of retainers, a clever servant could leverage patronage to climb the ladder. Still, such success stories were the exception. For most servants, life was bounded by hierarchy. They answered to those above and commanded those below. A kitchen maid might oversee the scullery girl, but herself had to answer to the cook, who answered to the steward, and so on. Everyone had someone to defer to. One interesting aspect of this hierarchy was how it mirrored feudal ideals of loyalty and protection. A servant owed loyalty to their lord, expressed in diligent service. In return, the lord had a paternal duty to provide for the servant, food, shelter, wages, and care in illness or old age, at least in theory. A well-known medieval saying was, "Service is no inheritance," meaning that no one is born a servant irrevocably. It was a role one took on, often voluntarily for wages or training. Some servants were indeed born into servile status, especially in early medieval times, if they were serfs, but by the later Middle Ages in England, most domestic servants were technically free people employed by contract. They could leave service and seek a new position elsewhere, though not without challenges, as we'll see. Thus, while servants lived constrained lives, they were not slaves, and their relationship with the master had elements of mutual obligation. This dynamic is encapsulated in manuals like Walter of Henley's Estate Guide and the Household Ordinances of Noble Families, which often exhort lords to be just and fair to their servants, to pay their wages on time, to provide livery clothing at least twice a year, and to not abuse them without cause. Of course, reality could diverge, but the ideal was a sort of family of the household, with the lord at its head and laird ranks beneath. In sum, the domestic staff of a medieval English household formed a miniature society with its aristocrats and commons. Titles like steward, squire, or scullion were not just job descriptions but social identities that dictated how one was addressed and treated. Everyone knew their place, and while a lucky few might improve their station, most lived and died in the role they occupied, loyal to their lords and proud, in their humble way, of the service they gave. Challenges and opportunities. Being a servant in medieval England was demanding, often exhausting work, and it came with many challenges. The hours were long, the labor was physically strenuous, and personal freedoms were limited. Yet, service could also offer a stable livelihood, and in rare cases, a savvy servant might grasp an opportunity for advancement or favor. Let's explore some of the hardships servants endured, as well as the slim silver linings that occasionally shone through. Daily hardships. For the average servant, the most immediate challenge was the sheer volume of work. They typically toiled from dawn until dusk, with very little time off, as one historical summary notes. A servant's day might stretch 12 to 16 hours with only brief pauses to eat meager meals. There was no weekend or concept of overtime, the work was done as long as it was daylight, and sometimes by candlelight beyond. Wages, if paid at all, were low. Room and board were part of the compensation, but those meant sleeping on a pallet in a crowded hall and eating coarse fare. Physical fatigue and injuries were common. Imagine the strain of hauling tubs of water upstairs, or tending giant hearth fires in sweltering kitchens. Servants were also subject to strict discipline. Noble masters expected absolute obedience and maintained order with an iron hand. Household rulebooks and lordly letters reveal that servants could be scolded, fined, or beaten for faults like negligence, theft, or insolence. A mistake as simple as a spilled wine cup at dinner could earn a sharp reprimand or worse. The harsh punishments for any mistakes or disobedience noted in records made servants ever fearful of incurring their master's wrath. Moreover, most servants had little privacy or personal life. They were effectively always on call. A maid sleeping in the lady's antechamber could be awakened at any hour if her mistress needed something. Male valets might sleep outside their lord's door, ready if he stirred in the night. Marriages among servants were sometimes discouraged by masters. A married servant might be seen as less available or likely to leave to raise children. In some cases, servants needed their lord's permission to wed. Those who lived in, the majority in great houses, had to abide by curfews and could not freely come and go from the castle or manor. They lived under the watchful eyes of higher servants who reported any misbehavior. Another major challenge was the social stigma. Servants, especially the lower-ranking ones, occupied an ambivalent social position. They were part of the household, yet decidedly inferior in status. In a rigidly status-conscious society, a servant had to endure snubs and sometimes outright abuse from their betters. A lord or lady in a foul temper might curse their servants or strike them, and the servant had little recourse. The concept of honor that gentlefolk cherished did not extend to servants, who were expected to tolerate humiliation patiently. One can find, in manorial court rolls, cases of servants being punished for insolent words against their masters or mistresses, verbal retorts that landed them in legal trouble. Additionally, plague and sickness hit the servant class hard. They lived in close quarters, and illness in the household would often spread among servants first. During the Black Death years, many servants perished alongside peasants, and those who survived found themselves suddenly in demand and able to ask higher wages, prompting new laws like the Ordinances and Statutes of Labourers, 1349 to 1351, to try to cap their pay. Those laws effectively tied some laborers and servants to their positions, making it illegal to leave employment for better pay elsewhere without permission, under pain of imprisonment. Thus, changing jobs was not always straightforward. A servant couldn't easily quit on a whim. Many had annual contracts or were liveried to a lord, given clothing and pay in advance, obligating them for a year of service. Despite the hardships, service was not without its opportunities and rewards, limited though they were. For one, a position in a wealthy household meant steady food and shelter, something not to be taken for granted in an era of famines and war. A young person from a poor village might actually improve their situation by entering service. They would eat better at a lord's manor than scraping by as a landless laborer. They might also learn valuable skills. A kitchen apprentice could pick up cooking techniques, a chambermaid could learn embroidery or medicinal lore from older servants, a manservant might learn to read or handle accounts if he showed aptitude. Service was sometimes seen as a training ground, especially for youths. The idea of starting as a page and rising to knighthood is one example of an ingrained path of advancement for those of gentle birth. But even for commoners, a bright servant could be promoted from stable boy to head groom, or from kitchen maid to cook's assistant, over the years. Some lords took notice of especially loyal or talented servants and gave them one-time chances, perhaps appointing them as a bailiff of a small manor, or rewarding them with a bit of land or extra pay. In the Pashtun family letters, we find an interesting case. Richard Kaye, the Pashtun's estate steward, essentially a chief servant, so proved his worth that he gained the affection of his master's daughter. In 1469, Richard Kaye actually married Marjorie Pashtun, with her parents initially furious at their daughter marrying below her station. Though a scandal at the time, it illustrates how a servant of low birth could, by merit and some audacity, climb the social ladder, in this case, literally joining the gentry family he served. While such romantic outcomes were rare, it was not unheard of for a servant to accumulate a little wealth or property. A faithful servant might be remembered in a lord's will, receiving a small annuity or a gift of a cow or a bit of land. Particularly in monasteries or in royal service, long-serving personnel could retire with a pension or be looked after in old age. Servants also derived a sense of community and identity from their role. They were part of a great lord's affinity, a source of collective pride. When their lord fared well, they celebrated. When he fell on hard times, they too suffered. There are accounts of servants showing remarkable loyalty, staying to defend a castle even when under attack. Margaret Pashtun's letters describe how in 1448 one of her manor houses, Gresham Castle, came under siege by a rival lord's forces. With her husband away, Margaret and a few members of her household, likely including armed servants and retainers, held out as long as they could. Eventually they were ejected by the besiegers, but her servants had literally put their lives on the line to protect their lady and her property. She wrote urgently to her husband requesting crossbows, poleaxes, and protective jack coats for her household defenders. This dramatic example shows that servants could be caught up in the feuds and warfare of the era, and that in moments of crisis, the line between servant and soldier are blurred. Those tasked with guarding the castle or accompanying the lord to battle shared in the dangers of medieval conflict. Lastly, we should mention the emotional bonds that could form. Living in close quarters, serving a family for years or decades, servants were often intimately involved in their masters' lives. A wet nurse might raise a noble child from birth and be cherished almost like a foster mother. A valet who served a lord from youth to old age might become his confidant and be described as a beloved old servant in chronicles. These personal bonds could give servants a degree of informal influence. A lord might heed advice from a long-time retainer whom he trusted deeply, much to the annoyance of the lord's noble peers, who might sneer about upstart servants. In the royal courts, of course, this dynamic was especially noted. Kings like Edward II and Richard II of England infamously elevated certain personal friends, who technically began as royal household servants, to positions of power, causing political strife. While those are extreme cases, they underscore that favoritism could sometimes bypass rank. A canny servant who won a lord's favor might accumulate gifts, land, or lucrative offices, essentially leveraging personal trust into social capital. For the vast majority of medieval English servants, however, life remained a cycle of hard work with modest recompense. They endured long days, took pride in serving well, and in return gained security and a place in the feudal order. The lucky few climbed higher or won a measure of esteem, the unlucky might be cast off without a reference if they displeased their master. Yet collectively, through good and ill, it was the labor of servants that kept the grand households of medieval England functioning each day. Their challenges were many and their opportunities few, which makes it all the more important to acknowledge their resilience and contribution. Conclusion: the servant's legacy. In the grand tapestry of medieval England, the lords and ladies may have been the shimmering gold thread, but the servants were the sturdy linen beneath, often unseen, yet holding everything together. From the castle's soaring towers down to its drafty kitchens and barns, servants provided the muscle, skill, and day-to-day management that allowed noble life to flourish. They were the ones who lit the fires each morning and doused the lamps at night, quietly enabling every feast, every hunt, every comfortable night's sleep that the upper classes enjoyed. Though overlooked in most chronicles, their contribution was nothing less than the foundation of noble society. The legacy of medieval servants can be measured in several ways. On a practical level, they literally sustained medieval culture. Without servants, knights could not have ridden off to tournaments or war, someone had to care for the horses and armor, nor could ladies have worn those elaborate gowns, someone washed and mended them, nor could castles have projected hospitality and power, someone cooked the banquets and kept the halls clean. The labor of servants shaped medieval society by enabling the leisure and governance activities of the ruling class. In a sense, the chivalric and courtly accomplishments of the Middle Ages rode on the back of servant labor. We see this legacy even in language. Our words service, servant leadership, or service industries ultimately hark back to the roles defined in medieval estates, a reminder that serving others was codified and expected long ago. Culturally, the idea of loyal service became a medieval virtue in itself. A good servant was the prototype of fidelity, humility, and diligence. These ideals filtered into literature. Think of the ever-faithful steward, or the long-suffering nurse, or the clever servant who outwits foes to save his lord. While real life was often less glamorous, the appreciation of good service was genuine. Nobles kept elaborate household ordinances and books of courtesy to ensure their servants upheld high standards. In turn, many servants took pride in being part of a noble house's honor. The reputation of a great family often rested on having a well-run household, which was a credit to its servants. Thus, their legacy is also one of professionalism. The medieval household was arguably the birthplace of organized domestic work and estate management, arts that have evolved but not vanished. For modern historians, reconstructing the lives of these medieval servants has been a bit like excavating a hidden foundation. Scholars such as Kate Mettes and Steve M. Woolgar have painstakingly combed through account rolls, payrolls, and letters to bring these individuals back into the narrative. Each wage entry or mention of a servant in a letter is a small window into their world. We have discovered, for instance, how a 14th-century countess's household was staffed and financed, or how many pairs of shoes a duke's servants wore out in a year. Through such details we gain a richer, more truthful picture of medieval life, one that includes not just kings and battles, but cooks and laundresses and grooms going about their daily business. In acknowledging the servant's legacy, we also gain empathy across time. The basic rhythms of a servant's day, work, worry, occasional satisfaction, meager rest, are not so alien to us. While the social structure has changed, many people today still work in service roles. Understanding medieval servants reminds us how fundamental and historically enduring such work is. It also highlights how far workers' rights have come. the invisible medieval servant has become the modern essential worker, deserving of recognition and fair treatment. History's value lies in these lessons. The servants of medieval England may have been voiceless in their own era, but in studying them we give them a voice and honor their contribution. As we close the great ledger of this imaginary noble household, we can picture for a moment one of those countless servants, perhaps an exhausted young scullion banked by the kitchen hearth, or a grey-haired steward writing accounts by candlelight. Their names are mostly lost, but their collective legacy endures in every castle that stood firm, every grand meal served, every estate kept running in the Middle Ages. The forgotten workers of the medieval world were, in truth, indispensable. By reviving their story, we not only enrich our understanding of the past but also pay tribute to the human effort that underpins history's grand edifices. The castles may have been built of stone, but they were upheld each day by the sweat, skill, and steadfastness of medieval English servants, a legacy as solid as any wall of stone. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious. A day in the life of a medieval English knight. A knight's morning. At first light, the knight rises to begin his day as he has since his youth, with prayer. The castle's small chapel echoes with his hushed dawn devotions. It is customary for a knight to start every morning at Mass or in private prayer, thanking God for protection through the night and seeking blessing for the day's tasks. In 12th century Plantagenet England, as in later centuries, knighthood is imbued with Christian duty. A morning sermon might remind him of the chivalric creed, to protect the weak, right wrongs, and honor God and King. This ideal of service, preached since the days of Henry II, sets a solemn tone to the new day. After prayer, practical routines commence. In his chamber, the knight squire and grooms await with his gear. The young squire is ever present, ready to assist his lord throughout the day, helping him to dress, serving him at table, running errands, and sleeping by his door at night. Piece by piece, they gird the knight for the day. The squire has already inspected the chain-mail hauberk for broken links and polished the steel helmet and sword until they shine. He holds up the heavy mail shirt as the knight slips it over his padded gambeson. By the 14th century, this morning ritual includes strapping on plate armor segments, steel vambraces on the arms, greaves on the legs, which supplement the mail. Though armor has evolved since the 12th century, when a knight like William Marshal would don only mail and a conical helm, the process of arming remains a two-man job. Squire and knight work in tandem, buckling straps and checking every buckle. A well-trained squire ensures that his master's sword is sharpened and shield secured, for he may need them at a moment's notice. Fully dressed for the day, though not yet in battle array, the knight joins his household for a simple breakfast. Despite his status, the first meal is modest and quick. He breaks bread and takes some cheese, washing it down with ale or watered wine, a common breakfast for folk in medieval England. As he eats, he might quietly recite another prayer or perhaps converse about the day's agenda with his steward. There is likely a hunting excursion planned or training exercises to supervise. But before any of that, the knight pauses to cross himself and reflect. In these peaceful morning moments within the castle walls, he lives the orderly life of a Christian nobleman. He thinks of the legendary Sir William Marshal, once called the best knight in the world, who prayed each morning just as he does now, and who served for English kings faithfully in his long life. The continuity of these dawn rituals, from the 12th century Marshal to the 14th century knight himself, reminds him that though times change, a true knight's day always begins with piety, preparation, and a sense of purpose. Training and duty. As the pale gold of morning sun fills the castle's training yard, the knight turns to honing his martial skills. After breakfast, he leads his squires and men-at-arms in weapons practice. They set up straw-filled quintons, targets that spin on impact, for lance drills. Clad in lighter practice armor, the knight mounts his horse and charges the quintin, couching his lance underarm. This exercise builds the precise coordination of man and warhorse needed to deliver a devastating charge. Knights and horses train together so the steed responds to knee pressure alone. A knight must guide his horse with only his legs, as his hands will be busy with shield and lance. Practice makes perfect, as the saying goes, and indeed the renowned William Marshal credited relentless training for his prowess. As a youth in Normandy, Marshal spent 7 years mastering the art of combat on horseback, learning to ride at full tilt with a lance aimed true, and refining his strikes with sword and mace. Inspired by such an example, our knight drills tirelessly. He swings a blunted greatsword over and over at wooden posts, strengthening the muscles needed to cleave through armor in battle. To increase his endurance, he trains with weapons heavier than those used in war, so that the real sword feels nimble by comparison. He practices with a variety of arms, long sword, axe, even bow and crossbow, for a well-rounded knight is proficient with additional weapons such as a dagger, battle axe, mace, bow, and crossbow, beyond the lance. In this daily routine of sparring and drill, the knight's 13th century forebears would find much familiar. Save for newer techniques, like bracing for the shock of a longbow volley, an emerging reality, the fundamentals of knightly combat training remain unchanged: strength, skill, and teamwork with one's horse. By mid-morning the clang of steel in the yard gives way to another call to prayer. Knights pause for terce, the canonical prayer hour around 9 a.m., to center their minds on God once more. Afterward comes the day's second meal, a substantial dinner served in the Lord's hall before noon. The knight joins his lord, perhaps the earl he serves, or if at home, he himself is the lord of the castle, at the long trestle table. They partake of roasted meats, fish, pottage stew, and fresh bread, washed down with ale or wine. Such communal dining isn't just about eating, it is an arena for chivalric courtesy. By the 13th century, knights are expected to display refined manners at table. As time went on, there was a greater emphasis placed on manners and chivalry, and knights learned the rules of proper court behavior and table etiquette. Our knight carves meat for the ladies present, speaks politely, and observes protocols: no elbows on the table, hands washed before the meal, sharing salt and trencher with appropriate deference. He might even engage in genteel conversation about music or poetry, demonstrating that he is as courtly as he is courageous. The ideal knight, after all, should be both a warrior and a gentleman. In these peaceful interludes, the knight hones his social graces, knowing that honor is upheld not only on the battlefield but also in the banquet hall. With the noon hour past, it is time to attend to feudal duties. On days free of war, a knight's responsibilities extend to governance and stewardship. If our knight is a lord of his own manor, he will hold the manorial court in the afternoon. In the great hall, he takes his seat as local justice. Peasants from his estate gather to present grievances and disputes. The knight listens as a villein accuses his neighbor of encroaching on his croft, or as a miller is fined for overcharging at the lord's mill. The manorial court is the basic unit of law in the countryside. The court dispenses justice for crimes committed on the manor, hears civil disputes between tenants, and collects rents, fines and fees owed to the lord. The knight weighs evidence, perhaps advised by a clergyman or steward who records the proceedings, and renders verdicts. A thief might be ordered to the stocks, or a portion of land might be restored to its rightful tiller. He also oversees the collection of feudal revenues, annual rents in coin or produce, fees for the use of the lord's oven or wine press, and even traditional payments like a merchant marriage fee when a peasant's daughter weds. All flows into the manor's rolls and coffers, funding the knight's household and his military needs. Yet the wise knight tempers lordly rights with responsibility. He knows that his strength ultimately rests on the productivity and loyalty of the people under his protection. Records suggest around 15 to 30 peasant families were required to support the upkeep of one knight's family and estate. Thus, he must not grind them too harshly. After court, he might announce a fair judgment that endears him to his folk, forgiving a portion of rent due to a poor harvest, for instance, balancing feudal authority with noblesse oblige. Later in the afternoon, our knight inspects his lands firsthand. Mounted on a steady palfrey, a riding horse, he rides out with his steward and a few men-at-arms to tour the manor. They pass through fields of wheat and barley ripening in the sun. The knight inquires with reeves, overseers, about the expected yield and any needed repairs to barns or ploughs. He stops to observe peasants mowing hay. His presence, clad in a simple surcoat now rather than armor, is a reminder of lordly oversight but also security. If bandits or outlaws lurk in the woods, the peasants know their knight can muster armed riders to defend them. Indeed, the feudal system is built on this very exchange. The labor of the peasant sustains the knight, and in return he provides protection. In troubled times, say, if rumors of a Scottish raiding party to the north reached these lands, the villagers would look to their armored guardian for safety. But today all is peaceful. The knight's survey takes him to the village forge, where he greets the blacksmith and checks on horseshoes being made for his stable. He might pay a visit to the village church where a new roof is being thatched, contributing a few coins for its completion. By evening, having ensured that all is in order on his estate, the knight returns to his castle. There, a messenger may be waiting with letters, perhaps summoning him to attend his overlord's court next month, or news from the royal court. The knight's life is a blend of martial readiness, local lordship, and service to greater nobles. Just as a 12th century knight owed duties to his liege lord, be it an earl, baron, or the king himself, so does our 14th century knight remain entwined in the feudal hierarchy. He stands prepared to answer higher calls, whether to advise his lord, to attend a royal tournament, or to mobilize for war. And on some days, that higher call comes suddenly, shattering the routines of castle life and plunging the knight into the whirlwind of conflict. The call to arms. One late afternoon, as our knight oversees squires fletching arrows in the armory, a horn sounds at the gate. A royal messenger, mud-splattered and weary, gallops into the castle ward. He bears dire news and a sealed parchment bearing King Edward's crest. The knight breaks the seal and reads the summons with a grim expression: England is going to war. In this instance, it is 1346, and King Edward III calls his lords and knights to muster for a campaign in France, the beginning of what will later be known as the 100 Years' War. Instantly, the castle springs into action. But the scenario is one that could have played out in earlier ages too. The message might well have been from King John in 1215, begging loyal knights to help quash a baronial rebellion, or from Henry III in 1264, rallying forces against Simon de Montfort's revolt. It might even have been news of a foreign invasion, like that of Prince Louis of France landing in England in 1216, when knights were urgently called to hold Dover Castle against the French besiegers. Whatever the century, the feudal obligation is the same. Upon the king's call, a knight must take up arms and bring his men to fight for crown and country. Our knight does not hesitate. He gives orders to assemble his retinue at once. As a tenant-in-chief, or a knight in service to a great lord, he is bound to raise a contingent of fighting men. In earlier medieval times, a knight's duty might have been specified as serving 40 days in the field with a set number of followers. By the 14th century, contracts, indentures, sometimes formalized the numbers. For example, a banneret might agree to raise 20 men-at-arms and 40 archers for a campaign. In our knight's case, he calls upon his household guard of men-at-arms, skilled soldiers who train with him, and local yeoman archers from his estates. Messengers ride out to the nearby villages carrying the summons. All archers owing service are to report with bow and arrows, all grooms to prepare horses for journey. The knight's armorers begin working through the night, hammering out dents in helmets and sharpening swords and lance tips. There is logistical chaos, controlled chaos, in these moments. The knight and his steward draw up lists of supplies: salted meat, hard biscuits, cheese wheels, and barrels of ale to sustain his company on the march. Wagons are loaded with tents, spare bowstrings, quivers of arrows, and bundles of fodder for the horses. Medieval armies must essentially carry a moving village with them. With 6 or more horses attached to every knight, no large mounted force can live off the land alone. Ample provisions are essential. Our knight will take several horses of his own, chargers, powerful war horses, for battle and a palfrey for riding, plus pack horses. It was normal, in fact, to take 4 war horses on campaign, in addition to a riding horse and pack animals, to ensure mounts were fresh. This personal herd requires attendants, farriers to shoe the horses and grooms to feed and water them. The scale of preparation underscores why medieval warfare was often seasonal and deliberate. One did not simply dash off to war without weeks of preparation. Within a short time, perhaps a week or 2, our knight's force is ready to depart. He has received further instructions to muster at a rallying point on the southern coast. On a crisp morning, the castle gatehouse opens and the banner of our knight is unfurled. He rides out at the head of perhaps 24 men, fellow knights or squires, men-at-arms in mail shirts, and longbowmen with yew bows taller than themselves. The knight's banner bears his coat of arms, brightly painted on fabric. Heraldry is not mere decoration. In the chaos of war it proclaims his identity. It is said that ransom became a cornerstone of chivalric warfare. An important knight, especially nobility, was worth a significant sum if captured, but nothing if killed, which encouraged knights to show their armorial bearings so foes would know their value. As our knight leads his column down the road, the sun glints off his polished helm and the fluttering pennon on his lance. He feels a mix of resolve and anxiety, emotions shared by knights for generations. He recalls a tale his grandfather told of answering King Henry III's call during the First Barons' War. In 1217, that grandfather, also a knight, joined the great William Marshal to relieve the siege of Lincoln. They rode hard for days and surprised the French and rebel forces at Lincoln, where Marshall's 400 knights charged into the city and won a decisive victory. That battle saved the realm from French conquest. Such stories inspire and reassure him. One knight, if loyal and brave, can turn the tide of history. He also remembers hearing of Prince Edward's mustering in 1265. Back then, knights from all over England flocked to Edward's banner to confront Simon de Montfort. At the climactic Battle of Evesham, the royal army numbered around 10,000 strong, including hundreds of armoured knights, and utterly overwhelmed Montfort's rebel knights, who were only about 200 in number. The rebel leader was slain and the rebellion crushed. These memories are living history to him, for some older knights in King Edward's host had fathers or uncles at Evesham. The names of those battlefields, Lincoln, Evesham, and legendary figures like Marshall and Montfort are spoken of with reverence or caution around campfires. Indeed, as our knight travels toward the assembly point, he joins a growing stream of armed companies, all converging for the campaign. They camp in open fields along the route, hundreds of tents dotting the meadows. In the evenings, knights mingle and exchange news. Around a flickering fire, a grey-haired knight might recount the siege of Dover of 1216, how Hubert de Burgh and a handful of knights held Dover Castle against Prince Louis's army, foiling the French invasion. Another boasts of having served Edward I in the Welsh Wars, scaling the crags of Snowdonia to subdue the princes of Wales. Our knight listens and learns. These camaraderie-building tales knit the disparate groups into an army with a shared heritage. Soon enough, they reach the coast where ships await. The banners of Henry III's grandson, Edward III, flutter above the docks of Portsmouth or Sandwich. It's time to cross the narrow sea. The knight leads his destriers up the gangplanks of a sturdy cogship, the vessels riding low under the weight of mailed warhorses and men. By the late summer of 1346, he finds himself on French soil, part of an invasion force of some 15,000 Englishmen, including around 4,000 men-at-arms and 10,000 longbowmen under King Edward. They march through Normandy raiding and drawing out the French host. The knight knows a decisive clash is near. Scouts report the French king's army is pursuing. Then comes the day when Edward III chooses his ground and waits for battle at a place called Crecy in Ponthieu. Our knight feels his pulse quicken as the order comes to ready for combat. The memories of all those earlier battles now crystallize into the present moment. It is his turn to add a chapter to the annals of knighthood. The battlefield. On the morning of the 26th of August, 1346, our knight stands upon a gentle slope near Crecy, France, clad in full armor and steeling himself for the onslaught to come. Battle is at hand. Unlike the grand cavalry charges of earlier days, today the English army employs new tactics. King Edward III has arrayed his forces thoughtfully. Dismounted English knights and men-at-arms form a solid centre, flanked on both sides by companies of longbowmen hidden behind stakes in the ground. Our knight is among those on foot in the front line. He has left his destrier tethered to the rear, a strange feeling for a man trained to fight a horse, but one that reflects the evolving nature of warfare. Decades of conflict with the Scots, like Bannockburn in 1314, where impetuous English knights came to ruin against Scottish pikes, and recent experiences in France have taught the value of fighting on foot in defensive positions. The knight's shield, emblazoned with his coat of arms, rests on his left arm, In his right hand he grips a tall poleaxe, a weapon favored now for close combat against armored foes. Beside him, other knights and squires ready their swords, maces or lances braced against the ground. Archers stand in staggered ranks a little forward on the flanks, their longbows already creaking as arrows are narked. Looking down the slope, our knight sees the French host emerging, a glittering sea of pennons, plate armor, and mounted chivalry eager to charge. Among them ride the famed knights of France, reputedly the finest heavy cavalry in Christendom. Many wear ornate coats of arms on surcoats over their armor. Like our knight, they are conscious of the eyes of friends and foes, and of the potential ransom value of their lives. The French have also brought mercenary crossbowmen from Genoa, but these foot soldiers are being shoved forward by the impatient nobles behind. With a blare of trumpets, the battle commences. French crossbowmen advance and loose a volley of bolts, but they fall short or glance off the English shields. Now comes the answer, the English longbowmen step up and draw. Thousands of bowstrings thrum in near unison, sending a dark hail of arrows arcing into the sky. Our knight can hear the hiss as the arrows pass overhead, an eerie, rushing sound like a great intake of breath, before they plunge down into the ranks of the enemy. The Genoese crossbowmen falter under this storm. Many bolts of the crossbow cannot match the range and rapid rate of the yew longbow. Within minutes, the crossbowmen are in disarray, some throwing down their weapons. The French knights, enraged at the delay, decide to charge through their own infantry. English longbowmen shattered multiple charges by French knights at Crécy in 1346, as one chronicle succinctly records. Now our knight witnesses it firsthand. He murmurs a quick St. George, guide us under his breath. Across the field, squadrons of French knights lower their lances and spur their destriers up the slope, determined to ride down the impudent archers and men on foot. They come in waves, the ground shaking under thousands of hoofbeats. This, the thundering charge of armored knights, is a sight our English knight was trained all his life to both execute and withstand. He tightens his grip on his poleaxe. The French charge must cross ground slick from a prior reign, recently churned by fleeing crossbowmen. They also face the deadly gauntlet of the longbow. English archers shoot at will, loosing 10 to 12 arrows per minute. The sky darkens momentarily with the volume of their arrows. French knights and horses are struck mid-gallop, men tumble from saddles, skewered by clothyard shafts that pierce visors or find joints in plate. Riderless horses crash into one another. But the momentum of French chivalry is immense. Despite horrific losses, dozens of knights still reach the English line. Our knight braces himself behind his shield as an ironclad foe on horseback barrels toward him. At the last moment, the French knight's wounded horse veers, and the man-at-arms is unseated practically at our knight's feet. He seizes the moment, swinging his poleaxe down. The weapon spike punches through the fallen foe's breastplate, ending the struggle. All around, similar brutal fights erupt. The once vaunted charge has broken into piecemeal fights as surviving French knights engage the English men-at-arms hand to hand. Melee, organized chaos, now reigns. Swords clash, axes crunch against helmets. The English knights, fighting on foot in tightly knit groups, have the advantage of solidarity. Their line, while bent in places, does not break. Meanwhile, any French rider who pushes too far in finds himself surrounded and pulled from horseback by axemen or billmen, infantry armed with pole arms. The field is a scene of desperate heroism and carnage. At one point, our knight hears shouting that Prince Edward, the Black Prince, King Edward's heir, commanding the vanguard, is in peril. Glancing to the right flank, he sees a knot of French knights have punched through near the prince's standard. The young prince is fighting valiantly, but he is outnumbered and even knocked down. A messenger gallops to King Edward, observing from a windmill on a hill, to beg for reinforcements for the prince. Famously, the king refuses, saying, "Let the boy win his spurs, he will not deny his son the chance to earn glory." Re-inspired by their prince's resolve, the English knights redouble their efforts and manage to rescue Edward. Our knight only hears of this after the battle. In the thick of the fray he only sensed the general swell of cheers when the prince remounted, safe. Such episodes will later be recounted as part of the chivalric lore of the battle. But in the moment, our knight's focus narrows to the enemy directly before him. He parries a heavy blow from a French mace, feeling the shock reverberate up his arm. Gritting his teeth, he counters with a sword slash that catches his foe on the unarmored gap under the arm, biting deep. The French knight falls to his knees. Two English archers, now out of arrows, rush in with mallets and daggers to finish him off or force his surrender. The melee surges back and forth across a few hundred yards, but importantly the English line never collapses. Hours later, the Battle of Crécy subsides into a bloody sunset. The French mounted charges, perhaps as many as 15 separate charges, have been utterly devastated. The flower of French knighthood lies scattered on the slope. Great lords and famous knights, including King Philip's ally King John of Bohemia, lie dead or dying. Those French who can still flee are in full retreat by nightfall. Against all expectation, a relatively small English force, though composed of tough veterans, has overwhelmed the finest cavalry in Europe by fighting on foot with archery support. Exhausted and exhilarated, our knight leans on his sword and surveys the ghastly field. Bodies of men and horses carpet the ground. Here and there wounded horses cry out in pain, the groans of injured men create a low lamenting sound. The air smells of blood, churned earth, and smoke from a few fires still burning in overturned wagons. In this moment, the knight experiences the dichotomy of his calling, the glory of victory and the horror of its cost. He doffs his dented helmet, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. There is a dent in his breastplate from a lance strike and an arrow jutting from the top of his shield. Thankfully, he feels only minor cuts and bruises beneath his armor. This time, he has been lucky. Now comes the aftermath duties that every knight knows well. Chaplains attached to the army move among the fallen, offering last rites to any still clinging to life. Our knight finds his own squire, who miraculously survived with only a gash on his thigh. He claps the young man on the shoulder, relieved. Together, they begin to assist the wounded. Despite the era's primitive medical knowledge, medieval surgeons are not entirely helpless. The field surgeons use wine or vinegar to cleanse wounds and prevent infection. Even if they don't know the science, they know it helps. They pack serious wounds with honey-drenched dressings, honey being a natural antibacterial remedy known to 12th century medical texts. One knight with a crushed arm might have it splintered, another with an arrow embedded in flesh might endure the arrowhead being carefully cut out with a surgeon's tool, just as one did for Prince Henry at Shrewsbury years later using a honey-coated extractor. Our knight removes his mailed gauntlets and helps hold down a moaning archer as a barber surgeon stitches a deep cut on the man's shoulder. In this grisly clinic under the darkening sky, there is a peculiar camaraderie. Knights, squires, and common archers all share in the human suffering of war. Rank momentarily fades when a man cries out in pain. Anyone hale enough will lend a hand with water or bandages. The knight murmurs a prayer as he helps a surgeon, recalling the Christian duty of mercy even amid violence. Once the urgent care is done, thoughts turn to the fallen and to prisoners. By custom, the bodies of high-born knights are to be treated with respect. Our knight joins a detail to find the corpse of a French count he recognized by heraldry. They locate the nobleman's body among a pile of others, carry it aside, and cover it with a cloak. The count's shield, bearing a golden lion on scarlet, is propped to mark him. He will later be sent to his family for proper burial. Meanwhile, other knights are gathering any prominent captives. A few French knights who yielded are being guarded under watch. These prisoners will be tended and treated according to their station. The goal is to ransom them back to their kin. Ransom is a cornerstone of knightly warfare. As the saying goes, a captive knight's life is worth a king's ransom, sometimes literally. Our knight fully expects that letters will soon be dispatched to the families of these prisoners, naming a price for their release. It's a strange facet of chivalry. Moments ago they were trying to kill each other. Now a captured foe might dine at the victor's table and address him as a brother-in-arms while negotiating terms. But it is a pragmatic mercy. Ransoming not only enriches the victor but also encourages knights to spare each other on the battlefield when defeat is clear. On this day, with French casualties so appalling, relatively few prisoners of note are taken. Most fought to the death or were cut down in the chaos. Still, as he surveys the carnage, our knight is grateful that the unwritten code of chivalry spares at least some lives from the sword. He himself has captured a wounded French man-at-arms who yielded to him. He's already given orders for the man's wounds to be treated. If the man survives the night will see to it that he is housed honorably until ransomed. Such acts quietly burnish the victor's honor. There is no need for cruelty. Fortune of war has determined today's winners and losers. Night falls fully, and under flickering torchlight the battlefield clear-up continues. The English dig several pits to bury the common dead. The sheer number of fallen foot soldiers and horses necessitates mass graves. It is grim, heavy work, often left to camp followers. The knight, weary as he is, says a final prayer over the ground where so many souls departed. He thinks of the knights of old he admired. Would they approve of his conduct today? He has fought bravely, held the line, shown mercy where possible. In the distance, he hears King Edward ordering that thanks be given to God for the victory. The Te Deum will be sung in the camp chapel tent. Our knight removes his helmet and bows his head, joining in the chorus of praise that drifts across the night air. This was a great victory for England, one that will be remembered for ages. Crecy will join the songs of triumph alongside Tinchebray, Lincoln, and others. But for the knight personally, the day has been long and harrowing. As he trudges back to his tent, armor clattering with each step, he knows that when dawn comes, he and the army will march onward to the next objective, perhaps the siege of Calais. The battlefield is behind him, but the war is not over. Still, he allows himself a moment of relief and pride. He has survived one more battle, earned new renown, and upheld his oath of fealty through blood and fire. In the lore of knighthood, to triumph in battle is the ultimate proof of one's honor and skill, and on this day, he and his comrades have proven themselves against the greatest odds. Life beyond the battlefield. In the weeks following the battle, our knight's martial exploits become the stuff of storytelling, both in the army's camp and back home in England. Eventually, after many more marches and a successful campaign, he returns to his homeland. When the knight finally rides through the gates of his own castle again, it is a time for rejoicing. The drawbridge clatters over the moat as villagers and castle folk line the path, cheering their lord's return. Trumpets sound from the battlements. His wife, children, and household come forward into the courtyard to greet him. The knight swings down from his saddle and embraces his lady, who has managed affairs in his absence. For months, she has been the chatelaine, ensuring the estate ran smoothly and praying for her husband's safety. Now she can finally breathe easy. The knight lifts up his young son, who is eager to hear tales of heroic battles. He pats the head of his shy daughter, thanking God that he lived to see his family again. Many knights do not return from war. The thought crosses his mind as he sees the tearful smiles of his loved ones. He silently offers a prayer for fallen comrades who will never see home again. That evening, the castle is alive with celebration. The great hall is hung with tapestries and evergreens in honor of the victorious homecoming. A feast is laid out on the long oak tables, trenchers of fresh bread, roast venison from the Lord's Park, game bird seasoned with spices, fish from the river, and rich stews. The knight, bathed and dressed in a comfortable tunic, far removed from the sweat-stained armor of battle, presides at the high table with his lady. Minstrels strike up music on harp and lute. They sing ballads of heroic deeds, perhaps even improvising verses about the Battle of Crécy, telling how English longbows felled the proud French knights. Our knight is called upon to speak. Modestly, he recounts some highlights of the campaign for his guests, how King Edward outmaneuvered the French, how the knights held their ground. He lifts a goblet of wine and toasts the King and St. George, the patron saint of England and soldiers. The hall echoes with shouts of hurrah and Deo gratias. Thanks be to God. This feasting and merriment is not mere indulgence, it serves to knit the community after the anxieties of war. The knight distributes gifts, a few French coins and trinkets he brought back are given to his squires and loyal servants as tokens of gratitude. To the church he pledges a donation for a new altar cloth, in thanks for divine protection. Medieval knights are expected to be generous, especially after a victory, sharing the spoils and giving alms. Tonight, the wine flows freely and old stories are retold. One traveling troubadour sings of King Arthur's knights, stories of Lancelot and Gawain, of chivalry and courtly love, which delight the listeners and subtly flatter the present company by drawing parallels. In such moments, our knight feels the weight of history and legend on his shoulders. He and his fellows strive to live up to the ideals immortalized in song. In the days that follow, the knight settles back into the rhythms of castle life. Yet he is changed by his experiences, as every campaign leaves its mark. At council meetings in his hall, he is a bit grayer, a bit wiser, dispensing advice to younger knights who seek to earn their spurs. He again supervises the estate, checking the accounts, hearing reports from his bailiffs, but also takes time to simply be with his family. He watches his son practicing with a wooden sword in the courtyard, the boy trying to emulate his father's knightly prowess. With a fond but stern smile, the knight corrects the lad's footing and teaches him a basic parry. The path to knighthood begins in childhood, as it did for him. He remembers being a page at a great baron's castle at age 7, learning courtesy and basic skills, then a squire at 14 polishing an older knight's armor. Now the torch will someday pass to his heir. His wife, meanwhile, he treats with renewed respect and affection. The lady of the castle has proven her mettle in keeping the domain secure. During his absence, she managed not only the finances but also may have dealt with a minor crisis or two, perhaps mediating a dispute among vassals or organizing defenses against a roaming band of brigands. Medieval noblewomen often had to be capable and strong, especially when their husbands were at war. The knight acknowledges this by giving her credit in front of their people, reinforcing their partnership. Together, they attend a special mass of thanksgiving in the castle chapel, appearing side by side before God and their community. Such public piety and unity set an example to their tenants. As a lord, the knight also re-engages with the local community in times of peace. He presides over harvest festivals, ensuring the surplus grain is stored safely for winter. On feast days, he and his lady sponsor charitable distributions, giving bread and ale to the poor at the castle gate. The villagers come to him with petitions. One asks for a reduction in rent due to a family illness, another seeks justice against a traveling merchant who cheated him. The knight listens patiently and tries to act justly. Part of the chivalric code he lives by is not only prowess in war, but also protection of the helpless and fairness in governance. A knight is called to be just and upright in his dealings. Our knight remembers how, at his knighting ceremony years ago, the presiding lord tapped his shoulders with a sword and enjoined him to be brave, loyal, and protect the innocent. Those vows echo now in his civil responsibilities. In many ways, he serves as a role model in the region. People look to him as a kind of living symbol of stability, one who can read, at least a little, who can negotiate with royal officials, who can lead the local militia if needed. In return, they grant him respect and a degree of reverence. When he rides out on patrol through his lands, peasants bow or doff their caps. He might stop to chat with a farmer about the coming lambing season or compliment a miller on maintaining the mill. These small human interactions ground him. After the grand theatres of war and court, the ordinary life of the manor reminds the knight of what he ultimately fights for, the safety and prosperity of his people and land. Of course, not all of a knight's peacetime life is duty and administration. There are lighter pursuits as well. Tournaments, for instance, remain popular in peacetime as both sport and training. Edward III, much like his ancestors, encourages jousting and martial games to keep knights sharp. Our knight attends royal tournaments occasionally, grand events held at places like Windsor or Westminster. He might even participate in the lists, jousting for honor and prize. In the lavish tournament grounds, lined with pavilions and attended by ladies in their finery, he relishes the pageantry. These events allow knights to display their chivalry and courtliness. When he is not tilting with a lance, he mingles in the stands, exchanging polite conversation with nobles and perhaps dedicating his performance to a lady, often one's own wife or a lady of the court, as courtly love tradition dictates. The knight's experiences in real battle give him an edge in tournaments. He is confident yet tempered by true danger, unlikely to be rash. He carries himself with the dignity befitting a seasoned campaigner. If he unhorses an opponent in the joust, he immediately dismounts to check on the fallen knight's condition, helping him up and showing gracious sportsmanship. Such behavior exemplifies the courtesy expected of knights by the 14th century. In earlier medieval times, tournaments could be wild melees with serious injuries, as William Marshall's 12th century exploits show, but by our knight's era they have become somewhat more regulated and steeped in ritual. The knight's prowess and gentlemanly conduct in these mock battles enhance his reputation further. In the later years of his life, our knight begins to think about his legacy. He has a keen sense of living in a storied age. The Plantagenets and their knights have made history, from Henry II's reforms to Edward III's victories. There is continuity in the knightly tradition that he wants to pass on. He sponsors a local monastery's manuscript project to write a chronicle of recent events, ensuring that the heroism of English knights is recorded for posterity. Perhaps he even commissions an illuminated family genealogy, tracing his lineage back to a companion of William the Conqueror, to inspire his children with pride in their bloodline. Many knights also took to building or endowing chapels or colleges as lasting memorials. Our knight donates funds to expand the village church, adding a chantry chapel where prayers will be said for his soul and the souls of those who fell in battle. This act is both pious and pragmatic. It helps secure his legacy as a godly protector of the community. On quiet evenings, the knight can often be found in that chapel, in solitary prayer. One such evening, he kneels before the altar where a lamp flickers softly. The castle is hushed, even the ever-busy kitchens are still, and only the distant howl of a wolf breaks the silence outside the walls. The knight's armor is set aside. He wears a simple woolen tunic as a penitent. Here, alone with his thoughts, he reflects on the path he has trod. He remembers the exhilaration of battles won, the thunder of hooves at the charge of Crecy, the cheers of victory at the siege of some distant castle, and he also remembers the terror of close calls, the faces of friends slain by his side, the screams of war that visit him in dreams. He prays for all the souls he helped send to God, hoping that in doing his duty he has not imperiled his own soul. Knights are often troubled in conscience by the violence inherent in their role. The Church teaches thou shalt not kill, yet knights kill for what they believe are just causes. How to reconcile this? Many knights, as they age, seek atonement. Some join crusades to the Holy Land, seeing it as a penitential act to fight infidels. Others join holy orders like the Knights Templar or Hospitaller, or in simpler ways devote themselves to charity and pilgrimage. Our knight decides that, should God grant him a few more years, he will undertake a pilgrimage to thank God for his deliverance. Perhaps he will go to Canterbury to pray at the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, or even to Jerusalem if the way opens. For now, he whispers a vow to make a pilgrimage to the shrine of Our Lady at Walsingham next spring, carrying the prayers of his family for peace and good fortune. Before he rises, he also thinks about the state of knighthood itself. The world is changing, he has seen it in his lifetime. The longbow and new tactics have altered the supremacy of the mounted knight on the battlefield. Gunpowder weapons are rumoured to be appearing. He heard that at Crecy the English even had a few clumsy cannon, though they played little role. Chivalry too is changing, becoming more courtly, more idealized by poets and princes. King Edward III recently founded the Order of the Garter, in 1348, a brotherhood of elite knights dedicated to St. George and bound by high ideals of honor and comradeship. Such developments suggest that knights are not merely feudal warriors anymore, but members of a more unified knightly class with shared values across Christendom. The knight wonders what the 12th century warriors would think of these refinements. Would King Richard's knights, who knew more of brute force and feudal fealty, understand the polished pageantry of a garter ceremony? Yet, beneath the surface differences, he suspects they would. The continuities run deep. Courage, loyalty, piety, these remain the bedrock of knighthood whether in 1150 or 1350. The knight allows himself a slight smile, confident that while armor and weapons may continue to evolve, the spirit of knighthood will endure so long as men of honor uphold it. His contemplations complete, our knight slowly stands, knees creaking a bit, the toll of years of riding and fighting. He makes the sign of the cross and leaves the chapel. The torches in the corridor cast a warm glow on the stone walls adorned with his family's heraldry. As he walks toward his chambers, he hears the distant hoot of an owl and the faint sound of a lullaby, perhaps his wife singing to their children one floor above. In the morning, life will go on, he will train young squires, administer justice, and remain ever vigilant for the next call to arms. But for now, he can rest in the hard-earned peace of his castle. A day in the life of a medieval English knight has come full circle, from dawn prayers to the quiet prayers of night, from sharpening swords in the morning to laying them aside at evening. Through 12th century feudal scuffles, 13th century civil wars, and 14th century international conflicts, the knight's role has expanded and his world grown more complex, yet his core journey remains recognizably the same. He is part of a living chain of chivalry, the Plantagenet knight in mail who battled at Lincoln, the banneret in surcoat at Evesham, and he himself in plate armor at Crecy all share the brotherhood of arms and honor. As our knight drifts to sleep, he can be content that in serving his Lord, his King, and his God, he has upheld the ancient code. Tomorrow, with God's grace, he will rise and do it all again, for this is the life of a knight, in peace and in war, in the Middle Ages of England. It is a life of duty, devotion, and undying legacy, remembered in chronicles and song long after the clatter of hooves and clash of swords have faded into history. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and please subscribe as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.